information. When we had rehearsal on Friday, two of our storytellers found out they have a connection they did not know they had. And that's often what happens when people come and share their stories. Then you find out, oh, they grew up 50 miles from where I grew up and I never knew that. Or, like these two gentlemen, they both worked in a similar field in their professional lives. So you never know what you're going to learn about somebody through the storytelling. So we welcome you all this afternoon. Our first storyteller is Phil Lunsford. Phil and his wife Jean live in South Village, and their daughter's here today. We're glad to have you with us. They've lived in South Village since September of 2007. Phil's story is entitled, An Oklahoma Oil Boom Town, Early 1900s. Phil?
Now, Coach.
Now, Coach. Now you can come.
Well, first, a little bit of history. I was born and grew up in Cleveland, Oklahoma.
Let's be sure they can hear you, Phil, because this is a good story.
Okay.
All right.
Much better? Okay.
Kiss it, Dad.
Yeah, you just about have to kiss it. You do.
Yeah.
Eat it.
First, a little history. I was born and grew up in Cleveland, Oklahoma. 20 years before I arrived, it was known as the Triangle Indian Territory. Indian Territory was called, where I was born, it was called a triangle because of the shape of the land, roughly 20 by 20 by 20 miles. It was on federal land, and that was an oasis among Indian reservations. The Osage were to the north, the Cherokee were to the east, the Creeks to the south, and the Pawnees to the west. It was legal to have alcohol on federal land. It was illegal to have alcohol on Indian reservations. For the next few minutes, remember that. Then came the land run of 1893, when the Cherokee Strip was opened to settlement, September 16th, 1893. The strip bordered the triangle, and the activity induced by the run spilled over into the triangle. The Missouri, Kansas, and Texas Railroad is the reason I grew up in Cleveland. We called it the Katy. My father and his family lived in Tulsetown, Indian Territory, in the late 1890s and the very early 1900s. It's now called Tulsa. Grandpa was a man of the Fourth Estate, a newspaper man there. Tulsa was in the Cherokee Reservation, and by federal law, the Cherokees could not sell any land in fee title, only lease the land. So nobody wanted to build an expensive brick and mortar building. At this time, all the buildings were of wood construction. My grandpa thought that Tulsa was not going to grow because of this and some other reasons. But Cleveland had a railroad, and it was going to grow. So off the family went to the Triangle and another newspaper. Well, bless Bess. In 1905, oil was discovered in Cleveland by the #1 Lowry. Oil had been discovered southwest of Tulsetown, so why not at the foot of Main Street just south of the Katy Depot? And then the oil boom started. Remember, this was raw country, no roads, only trails that followed the first horse. The only infrastructure was the Katy Railroad, and only mules and wagons, no trucks. They came later. As the oil fields were drilled, little hamlets sprang up to support families who were the drillers and those who produced the oil and maintained leases. And these little hamlets were frequently named after a town character like Jobo or Maud, Bowlegs, Dog Center. Then the churches and the school followed in time. Then followed the refineries to service the oil produced. Oil wells were in the backyard or on a vacant lot in Cleveland on the town site. In every school I went to, I walked by wells being pumped. The last well in Cleveland was still producing in 1950 in the backyard. At the height of the oil boom, my father told me Cleveland was a den of inequity. Ladies were not seen on the street after dark. It wasn't unusual to find a body in a dark alley. Mule skinners, rig builders, drillers, roughnecks, and camp followers of every description were everywhere, 10,000 of them. On Cleveland's main street, there were 13 saloons and 2 whiskey warehouses, one of which was bonded. Well, George Collins made his own in 2 wooden kegs. He would buy a drum of ethyl alcohol from the Cleveland drugstore, fill the kegs half full, and then add a little tobacco or creosote or something for color. Top it off with rainwater. It was aged for 20 minutes or so it was said. But nobody's ever seen any proof. Oh, what a pun. Remember, it was illegal to have whiskey in the reservations. Enter the ingenious bootleggers. One entrepreneur had a wagon load of large pipe loaded on his wagon. Each pipe had a bull plug screwed on tightly at each end. But the pipes were full of bottles of whiskey. And if he were stopped on his run from Cleveland to somewhere, he would just tell the lawmen he was delivering pipe to so-and-so. No telling how many miles that pipe had traveled. Late 19th century and very early 20th century was a time of lawlessness. Occasionally, gangs would pass through Cleveland going to or from somewhere. At times, it was an uneasy truce between the law and the outlaw. Miss Effie, I called her, was born up in the Osage in the 1970s, or the 1870s. She would tell me stories about when she was a young girl. One time, when she was about 10 years old, the younger brothers, 4 or 5 of them, stopped at their cattle ranch and asked if they could be fed. These were well-known outlaws. Of course, come in. Ranchers lived a solitary life, and even outlaws were welcome. Miss Effie said they washed up at the horse trough before eating, were very courteous, and profusely thanked her family. She said she never felt threatened all the time they were there. And the Dalton Boys, another local gang, lived in the general area of the Triangle and were much more prominent outlaws. They'd pull a caper somewhere and then hole up until things quieted down in a cave on the shore of the Arkansas River just north of the Triangle. Years later, people would go over and dig up buckets of coins and other artifacts. I got to go one time. It was a cave large enough to stable 6 horses with smaller caves for sleeping leading off of it. The main entrance to the cave was barely large enough to admit a horse if his head were held down. Today there's much press about fracking in the oil fields. It's a means to stimulate oil and gas well production. At the time of Cleveland's boom, hydraulic fracturing was unknown. Instead, they shot the well with nitroglycerin. I witnessed a well being shot. I guess I was 15. The nitroglycerin arrived in a small truck. En route to the well, the truck avoided going through a town or an inhabited area so as not to expose civilians to danger. It can and does blow up. The procedure began by placing 10-foot long cylindrical containers in the wellhead pipe and holding it there so the shooter could pour the nitroglycerin into the containers. That container was lowered to the bottom of the well, and then another one filled and lowered. Usually 2 to 3 containers was sufficient. The shooter would then light the fuse on the Go Devil and drop it down the well. It was a 3-foot piece of 2-inch pipe with a stick of dynamite at the end of the fuse. This was to ignite the explosives. This was followed quickly by a few shovels of sand, and then a curious thing happened. The shooter loosely crumpled up some newspapers and placed it in the top of the well pipe. We moved upwind and waited. I could not hear the explosion, but I felt it through my feet very distinctly. In a minute, the newspaper floated out of the well pipe, followed by a whoosh of oil and water and gas. It hit the top of the derrick and splattered into a dark plume, perhaps 200 feet in the air. That was it. Later tests proved the shot was successful in increasing production. Looking back now, I much prefer fracking over nitroglycerin. You see, I made a living fracking oil and gas wells in the 1950s.
Phil, thank you. You made that really come alive for us, especially the nitroglycerin part. While Velma Carruthers is coming up, I'd like to share her story. I'd like to introduce her to you. Velma came to Springmore from Aurora, Missouri, or Missouri, whichever way you say it, in 2007, and she is living now in Stewart Health Center. She has an interesting story and a picture to go with it.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I want to tell you about a shark dive I went on. And I have a picture here of me in my checkout dive, all the tanks and weight belts and the air tanks and things like that. A couple of years after I was widowed, I met Willard Brenstetter. We had enjoyed Table Rock Lake with swimming, riding in the boat, skiing, and just enjoying the lake. Willard's son Steve was in college preparing to become a marine biologist, which meant he would have to perform a lot of work underwater. So Steve, Willard, and a friend, Fred, took diving lessons. They took a couple of dive trips, and you know who had to stay at home and take care of the dogs. Without Willard's knowledge, I went to the dive shop and took a practice dive. I decided that someone else could feed the dogs. I passed the test and purchased my equipment, and we had been to various places with the dive shop, to Cancun, Cozumel, Aruba, but this time we went to a Bahama island which was not so commercial. We had been on this island for almost a week. They took us to different locations every day. When I learned that the shark dive was planned for the next day, I said, I'm not going. Well, the weather was so bad that they didn't go out at all. The next day was to be at some other location. I had missed the shark dive, We left the dock and anchored. We all started to suit up and check our equipment. All right, everybody, listen up, yelled the dive master. Go straight down, find some coral, and settle yourselves. Ever since Willard and I had been diving, and I use the term loosely, we would meet at the anchor line. So guess what? Velma was first off the boat, and where did she go? To the anchor line. I hung on for what seemed like a long time, waiting for Willard to get there. Just then I saw them coming around each side of the boat. Willard on one side, the dive master on the other. They grabbed me and pointed to the front of the ship and indicated I was to get there fast and get settled in the coral and pay attention. Well, when you don't have quite enough weight, it's hard to stay settled and not move around. I had just about made my nest when the dive master went out into the middle of the group holding a spear with a small fish impaled. In the murky water, I watched the periphery of the circle and saw shapes slowly moving. All of a sudden, a shark swam over to him, snatching that fish from the spear. I looked closer and there were more. There were 5 sharks total looking for more food. They swam circles around the middle of the group, looking, and about that time I decided I was about to run out of air and that I was going topside. Instead of a slow ascent, breathing as we've been taught to do, I swam to the top as fast as I could go, burst out of the water and grabbed the ladder. The boy who stayed on board to help the divers exit and enter the water saw me, and his eyes nearly popped out of his head. He helped me aboard. It takes some doing to climb back on a boat. You have your vest holding this heavy tank with all kinds of hoses and instruments, about a 16 to 20 pound weight belt, your mask that you need to get off as soon as you can so you can breathe, and those doggone flippers that just will not slip off your feet. You cannot climb a ladder with those flippers on. It wasn't long until the rest of the group came back on board. There had been 5 big ones, about 6 feet long. No one scolded me, but I could tell I was in the doghouse with Willard and the dive master. I learned a lot and enjoyed the diving and can share some other stories. And I have a picture here if anybody would like to see it. Huh? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Help me sit down. Okay. I can do it if you just take that. That was a few years ago. Thank you. Take that and pass it around, if you will.
Isn't this fun? Okay, you ready for this one? Joe Hale is going to come up here and he is going to kind of complete some of the stuff that he told you about before. Get ready.
Thank you, Joyce. Last time I talked about surveying in the Philippines. Today I'm going to talk about,
Talk into it, baby.
I think I'll just do this. Is this more better?
No, that's not gonna work,
Why not?
because you'll move it around too much. I think you need to.
Who said that?
I did.
Who do you think?
Who are you? Do I have to pay attention to it? Okay, I'll pay attention to you. I think we need to have a collection to get a better sound system. That's not all I'm going to talk about today.
Lean into it.
Okay,
Just put it right in there, baby.
okay. The minute I'm not talking into this, somebody raise a hand and I will catch on to it. That's what my students used to do, but they always complained because I never paid any attention to them. And I said, you're very lucky, because that usually means I don't call on you either. Okay, today I'm going to talk about Ed Hall and the Minuteman missile system.
We're talking to the microphone.
You're in a lot of trouble, aren't you? Okay, this is,
Follow directions, Joe.
okay, I won't. At the point well taken. Okay, is that any better?
Can you step up closer to the microphone? Just take a step closer.
Yeah.
Is that close enough?
Yeah. That's good.
This is not a comedy act, but it's sort of turning out to be one.
Just look right in there while you're talking. Don't look at these people. Just look right in there. Yeah.
This damn thing there. Is that better?
Go ahead.
Okay.
That's it.
The trouble is,
We want to hear you, babe.
but I can't talk and read and do all that at the same time.
Sure you can.
Sure I can. Okay. That's not going to count as my time, I'm sure. If it does, it doesn't really matter. Okay, today I'm going to talk about the Minuteman missile system and about Ed Hall, because you cannot talk about one without the other. Ed Hall was the father of the Minuteman. A lot of other people claim to have been the father of the Minuteman. We had a general who used to be known as the father of the Minuteman. I was on the program for over 2 years and I never even met the gentleman. So you do have to be careful. Now, the Minuteman was the unforeseen product of 2 Air Force officers. One was General Bernard Schriever, and the other one was Edward N. Hall, a colonel. Schriever was the facilitator, and Hall was the creator. Without the two of them, we would not have had the Minutemen. Today, I'd like to talk about the early days of the program and tell some anecdotes that you may not have heard, probably have not heard. I do not intend to talk about the deployment and the manning of the system. I left the program in 1959 and am not familiar with all the details. I do hope to give you a feel for how the program was created and carried out. When I use the term we, I'm talking about we, me, and Ed Hall. I'm talking, it's an editorial we, and the we belongs to mostly to Ed Hall. Before we go further, let's talk about the name, the Minuteman, and its origin. When Hall started working on the concept of a solid intercontinental ballistic missile, he would try his ideas on the rest of us. We listened politely, but were too busy to try out his ideas, to be too concerned. We listened politely and were busy with our own problems at the time. His first talked about digging holes in the backyards of reliable people, probably retired military people, and putting his missiles there. To Ed, a person with a missile in the background in his backyard was analogous to an early Minuteman with a musket over the fireplace, and thus a Minuteman. It was not called the Minuteman as Neil Sheehan applied in his book about the Minuteman, because it could be launched within a minute, which it could be. With the Thor IRBM well underway, Schriever removed Ed Hall from the program and charged him with studying ways to introduce solid stages into the ICBM programs, capitalize on the lessons learned with the liquid propellants. One of the lessons learned with the liquid propellants was that such systems were very expensive, both in manpower and money. Another problem was the costly requirement that all of the missiles, including those destroyed in the first attack by the Russians, have a very high reliability. 99.4% is the figure that sticks in my mind, and that had to be the purity of ivory snow back in those days. The third problem was the cost and of the large numbers of people involved in handling these, to maintain and launch the liquid missiles. Every position that needed to be filled and manned for 24 hours required 5 persons, to provide 24 hours a day. Leave and take care of leave, sickness, as well as supervisory people. P. Hall also talked about the necessity of a hot launch directly from the missile. No elevator, as was used with the, I think somebody's been gone. As with the Titan, when asked why he thought he could do a hot launch, his reply was, it's a simple matter of choosing the right diameter of the hole. Since the cost of the silo is quite important, we did have a study performed as to the maximum diameter before the cost became prohibitive. As I recall, it was 23 feet. Moving on, the driving forces for the Minuteman were cost and simplicity and few people, as smallest number of people possible. For example, the transporter that took the missile from the factory served three purposes. It was called a transporter, erector, loader, and it served three purposes. It was pulled by a two-man tractor and took the missile to the site, placed it in a vertical position, and then inserted it into the silo. Its width, length, and weight were chosen so that it could be moved without the need for escort vehicles. To meet the limitation of a 10-foot width on the highway for the transporter, the diameter of the first stage was artificially posted at 5.5 feet, a decision that will affect the diameter of the silo, as we'll see later. The concept called for an undetermined number of silos to be controlled by a launch control system. It was arbitrarily chosen to be 10, a nice round number. Ed Hall did not, he was going to control whatever he could do. Now, how many people should there be in a launch control center? At least 2 with separate launching keys and physically separated. We really would have liked 3 to resolve any differences and break ties and reduce the possibility of collusion between any 2 of the operators. At some time during the stage of developing the concept, Ed Hall was taken to Washington and allowed to present his thoughts at the end of the other weapon system briefings. The result is a day of fascinating and memorable history. I was not present, but I have heard from those who were. General LeMay, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, who had not been an enthusiastic supporter of ballistic missiles, allegedly said, "This is the one I've been waiting for." He said, "Come," to Ed Hall, he said, "come with me." He took him around to all the elements of the air staff and ended up with the last stop was the Secretary of the Air Force, the Secretary of Defense, not Secretary of the Air Force, who reportedly approved and established the Minuteman program. Then and there, when Ed Hall returned to the Western Development Division, the Minuteman Weapon System Office was installed. Up to that point, there had been about 2 captains in Ed Hall. I was assigned to the office. Proposals were written, contractors were situated, selected, and contracts signed. The Minuteman was underway. The question of the silo diameter was still undetermined. After the details of the configuration were determined, a test program at Edwards Air Force Base was established with the idea of answering that question. The plan was to dig a hole about 70 feet deep and insert a steel cylinder to serve as the launch tube. Thus, then the first stage of a test missile of the expected weight and dimensions would be loaded with sufficient propellant to get this missile out of the hole. After thrust cut off, the missile was to fall to the desert floor. To ensure that it did, a chain was attached to this test missile and fastened to the ground. If the launch so this would pull the missile back down to the ground. If this launch were not successful, a larger insert would be used, and so on. Incidentally, in later talks after I retired, some people snickered when I mentioned the chain, but occasionally there was someone in the audience who had seen it. Ed and I were faced with the problem of deciding the starting diameter of this expected series of tests. We, not an editorial we in this particular case, were sitting in his office pondering this question. He suggested that we start with a solid diameter that was twice the diameter of the first stage missile, namely 11 feet. I was quiet, and Ed asked me what was bothering me. I said, 11 feet, that's an odd number. I don't like odd numbers. He says, I don't either. Let's make it 12 feet. Remember, this was to be a starting number. I left the program MIT, for MIT before these tests started, and did not know the final diameter for many years, because I did not have the proper clearance. When I had the opportunity to ask, I was told that it was indeed 12 feet. I heard someone in the later Minuteman programs, either Minuteman 1 or Minuteman 2 or Minuteman 3, complained that they were constrained by the small diameter of the hole. After the program was approved and the system office was established, requests for proposals were written and proposals were evaluated and contracts were awarded. Somewhere in this time period, I was told to go to the Pentagon, address the Weapons Systems Evaluation Group, WESIG for short, and obtain their approval. WESIG was a group of prominent scientists and engineers. I met General Schriever at the briefing room. He introduced me and then left the room. As had been his practice on several other occasions, he did not ask for a prior personal briefing to see what I had planned to say, but nor did he suggest what I should say. His confidence was implicit and somewhat unnerving. I might have appreciated some guidelines. I worked for Schriever for many years, and every time I met him and walked in somewhere, he looked at me as though, who are you? Do I know you? But he knew who I was. In any case, the briefing and question and answer at WESIG went well. After all these years, I only remember one question and one comment. The question asked me, how much overpressure the silos could withstand. Remember, the silos had to accept an attack. I quoted the number that we at WDD had agreed upon and was then asked if I were sure it was correct. My reply was that I had no idea as to the actual value, but neither did the Russians. The comment was that a yield of 120 kilotons, 100 kilotons, which we were quoting at the time, seemed like a very small alongside the 5 or so megatons that we were quoting for the Atlas and the Titan. I told them that I had been at Eniwetok with the Armed Forces Special Weapons Project in 1958, and observed the detonation of 3 Fat Man-type atomic bombs with yields of approximately 30 kilotons. They did not seem small to those of us watching at that time, and 100 kilotons was not small. Thank you.
Awesome. 100 kilotons is not small.
No.
Amen.
It's not small.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Imagine working on all that stuff. to hear the other things that you all have been working on too. And now you've really got another treat. Alan Woods is coming up here, and Alan and his wife Elizabeth have lived in South Village for quite a while. No, not very long. Not very long at all. They just came right in and said they want to tell a story, and you're going to be glad you're here to hear it. Alan, let's do it.
Thank you. I left you the last time in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where we had just thrown all the bay leaves over the boat, over the side of the boat to get rid of them. My ship was in the South Pacific, and we were, excuse me, I forgot I had that thing in there. We were ordered back to New York to decommission the ship. So we went through the canal, and arriving in New York, orders were awaiting me to proceed to Little Creek, Louisiana, to board a minesweeper. A minesweeper is about 136 feet long, so you know it was a real small ship. I arrived late in the afternoon to find that no supplies had arrived, and I had 32 hungry guys to feed. I went over to a little mom and pop store and was singing the blues to the manager when a couple of nice ladies came over and gave me enough food stamps to get potted meat, and so I was able to make sandwiches for the crew that night. The supplies arrived the following day, and we up-anchored and started sweeping the east coast for the mines that had been laid by the German submarines. This ship was so small that in a rough sea, we would completely disappear between the waves. The galley was about the size, or maybe a little smaller, than the kitchens in our apartments here in Springmore. And they had metal railings around the range in order to keep the pots on the range, and you'd have a pot that deep, and you'd put that much in it because it would slop over the side. One day I had a pork roast in the oven, and I stuck the big chef's fork into the roast, and as I pulled it out, the ship lurched. The fork hit the bulkhead behind me, projected forward right into my rear end. With the advice of the crew, I applied for the Purple Heart. And the Navy sent me a communique that there was no category for that kind of an injury. Before coming aboard the ship, I had a hernia repair in the Naval Hospital in Norfolk, and the constant strain of trying to remain upright opened my incision. So I was transferred to the Chelsea Naval Hospital in Boston. And I'll tell you, if a guy ever had a guardian angel, I had one then, because I left terrible duty on that little ship. After a short stay in the hospital, I was sent to the receiving station to await orders. So every day I explored Boston. I attended the Boston Pop concerts on the Esplanade. I visited the Buddies Club for service people. I saw Sally Rand, the famous fan dancer. And then we, with a bunch of young sailors, 18, 19-year-olds, we'd heard about this tassel dancer over in Scully Square. So of course we went to see the tassel dancer. Now you all know what a tassel dancer is. She put tassels on the end of her boobs, and to the tune of the music she could swing those tassels around and up and down to the hoot and holler of all the sailors. We were kids, we enjoyed it. Well, before I got too far astray, my orders came through, and I had to report to the Navy Yard there to go aboard the USS Marblehead. Now, the Marblehead was an Omaha-class light cruiser with a crew of 823 men and officers. It carried numerous 6-inch guns and 3-inch guns and 21 torpedo tubes and 2 airplanes. Quite a change from the little tub that I had just left. The captain of the ship was a friend of the chef at the St. George Hotel in Brooklyn. And so while the ship was in dry dock for repairs, I was sent to the St. George to hone my culinary skills. For 2 weeks, I worked in the kitchen. And these were the days when food was inspected before it went into the dining room. Every tray that went into the dining room of the St. George Hotel stopped in front of a food inspector to be sure that it was correct. It was a fantastic experience. I saw a beautiful Jewish wedding where the chef was an artist and he carved a 6-foot swan floating in lilies. This was all ice and it was used as a centerpiece for the wedding. It was quite an experience for a young Navy cook who was trained to make baked beans. I set sail on the Marblehead in March of 1944. We did patrol duty down the East Coast, through the canal, up the West Coast, circled the Pacific Ocean, back down through the canal, and in August of 1944, we proceeded to the coast of southern France, where we acted as a support ship, firing at the Germans over the heads of the landing force. My battle station was below the 6-inch gun on the forecastle. 2 of us were sealed in a compartment. The shells came through a turnstile. We took them off of it and put them on a chain lift, and the shells went up to the gun overhead. We were enclosed in this little space. And of course, if we'd have been sunk, we'd have gone down because there was no way out. I don't remember being scared. I am now. But you know, by then I was 18, I was getting old. And I did not see the coast of southern France. I did not see the devastation and the horrible things that went on there because we were below deck. When we were through with our assignment, the ship turned and came back to the state. Guys in the galley were always pulling jokes on our workmates. However, there was one guy who always went a little bit farther than anybody else. I guess now we would call him a bully. I, being young and skinny, I was once, I was the fall guy. He took every opportunity to goose me. One day I was carrying a steam table pan loaded with spaghetti to go to the serving line, and this guy named Thompson, isn't that odd? I remember that name after all these years. Thompson came along and goosed me. Over my head went the spaghetti. On top of him, pan and all. And you know, that guy never bothered me again. We returned undamaged to the Philadelphia Navy Yard where the ship was decommissioned, and I received orders to report to Camp Shoemaker in California. A few days there, and up to Portland, Oregon I go to board the USS Freestone, a troop transport which was to join the Magic Carpet Fleet, bringing home the servicemen. Now, you know, you probably are wondering why I go back and forth across the United States, do duty in the South Pacific and duty in the Atlantic Ocean. Remember, I'm a cook. I never figured out whether I was so good they wanted to share my talents, or I was so bad they wanted to shift me around. The USS Freestone was well, then we thought it was a large ship. It had a crew of 536 with a troop capacity of nearly 1,600. I was piped aboard on the morning of January the 6th, 1946. Well, you know, they only pipe officers aboard, and I was walking behind the captain, and they piped him aboard, and I can always say I was piped aboard. We immediately upped anchored and got underway for Yokosuka, Japan, where we would aboard a transport military ship, a transport bringing military personnel back to the States. The Freestone had made this trip several times before I came aboard, and many would-be entrepreneurs had dreams of making a few bucks and had smuggled cases of Jack Daniels aboard, because they could sell it then to the soldiers who had not had stateside whiskey. Well, we were about halfway over when our orders were changed and had to return to the United States. And of course, there was no way they could get that whiskey off the ship back in Portland, Oregon. So what were we to do? Drink it. So one night, everybody that wasn't on duty met in the chow hall and proceeded to help get rid of Jack Daniels. Well, I don't know how much I drank. I had never had a drink before that, but somebody gave me a coffee cup full of whiskey, and the story goes that many of us danced on the chow hall tables that night. I don't remember. I remember one heck of a headache the next day. But we didn't get rid of it all, and so we had to throw it overboard, and there were a lot of sad, wet eyes, and Jack sank to the bottom of the ocean. So we were right back in San Francisco, and the orders were there to take the ship to Norfolk, Virginia, to decommission it. So we went back down through the canal. You know, this is about the 5th trip through the Panama Canal that I've made back and forth. And my enlistment in the regular Navy was to be up on April the 7th of 1946. But the captain asked me to stay aboard to cook for the decommissioning crew, which I did. And on April the 10th, 1946, I left the ship and headed to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, to be officially piped out of the service. Thank you.
Thank you. I had not heard those stories. I usually sit in on the rehearsal, but I missed it last Friday. I want to say a few things that I've been thinking about while I've been sitting back there. First of all, I don't know if you realize it, because sometimes we hear things and we think it about other people, but we don't think it about ourselves. But you are the greatest generation. My father served in World War II, and he died when he was 53 years old, and I didn't hear him tell stories about the war. I'm glad to hear those of you who served our country tell your stories, and I know that 2 of you in particular today have done that, and others have done it, and even if we don't understand all the details of the Minuteman missile, we know how people have served our country, and that these things were done not for any one person's glory, but for the glory of this country, and to preserve the freedoms that we know. And so I just personally thank all of you who've told stories, but especially all of you who have served in our country. Thank you very much. The other thing is, I love the other stories that get told too, don't you? Yeah. And we don't all have to have big, magnificent stories. They can be one event kind of stories like Velma told so beautifully today, or the growing up kind of stories that Phil told, but all of us have stories. We were about to decide to cancel this for February because we thought we weren't going to get enough stories, but I think we've finally gotten enough people coming forth. So again, if you want to hear stories, you're going to have to volunteer to tell stories, okay?
If you don't want to hear the same people giving you the story.
There you go. If you don't want to hear the same people over and over, you're going to have to volunteer to tell your story. Good for you, Joe. The last thing I want to say is some of you have asked who this person is over here. And she's been introduced before. This is Joyce Hahn, who is such a treasure to us. Those of you who've gotten to know her individually, she just dropped out of the sky kind of to us by an angel, and she came along and she wanted to know what she could do at Springmore, and we found out that she liked telling stories and had a lot of background in this, and she's the one who goes out and works with people to get their stories ready for them to tell today. So if you have a story and you think, I don't know if I can do that or not, we can send Joyce to you and she'll help you get it ready. She's done that for almost everybody that's told a story. So she's our kind of coach, our story coach, and we thank her so very much. What you've done has been very, very important.
Thank you, Joyce.
And we thank you very much. But she's always telling me when she has to call somebody for the first time, they said, they feel like this strange lady's calling me and saying, can I come to your apartment and hear your story? And that's who the strange lady is. She is strange, I'll attest to that. She's wonderful. Thank you again for coming today. Thank you, Beth, for all your work. And thank you, storytellers. Thank you all for listening.
That a resource that